You're listening to the Friday Sports Show on Salford City Radio 94.4 FM with myself, Jimmy Petruzzi, bringing you all the local sports in the area and sports around the world too. We're very fortunate on this show to get a wide range of guests who participate at the very highest level in sport, in athletics, across a broad range of sports, from rugby league to rugby union to football. We cover local sport as well. Our aim is to increase awareness and increase participation in sport, but also give you insights into the world of sport. We've sort of pretty much covered every four corners of the globe. And tonight's guest is really fascinating because we're going to get a look at what it's like to manage in England, Scotland, and also we're going to get a look at what it's like to manage in the lower leagues of England. At the moment, we sort of been following obviously our local team Salford, and in League Two, they probably aren't meeting the expectation of every fan. There's no real rumblings as yet, but we've seen how tough it can be in league football. And who better to give an insight into someone who has won promotion in the league, and he's going to give us insight what it's like to manage a team and get promoted in league football, but also his playing career and some accolades. We talk about British managers as well getting a chance to, and when they do get the chance, that they can do really, really well. So tonight's guest has done very well and received a number of accolades in football management too. So Derek Adams, welcome to the show. Great to have you on board.
Good evening, thank you.
Derek, we'll start with your playing career to give the listeners an idea of what it's like to play in Scotland. So if you talk us through your playing career, obviously you've played for the likes of Ross County, you've played for Livingston, Motherwell, you made your way across to Burnley and to Aberdeen. Give us a bit of insight into your playing career.
Yeah, I started off at Aberdeen in the 90s, and I'd been living in Aberdeen for many years. I had come through at a time watching the successful Aberdeen teams through Sir Alex Ferguson, and been involved with my father, who was the youth coach with Aberdeen for 9 years under Fergie, and then I was able to become an S for him. Became a professional football player for 3 years at Aberdeen, enjoying playing in the reserve team, being in the bench in the European Cup Winners' Cup as an 18-year-old, and eventually moving on to Burnley after not really making the grade at Aberdeen at the time. So I went to Burnley. Jimmy Mullen was the manager, and Adrian Heath then took over, and they were great times because the likes of Alan Harper, Adrian Heath, Ted McMinn were all involved in that squad, and I spent a year and a half there making my debut as a 19-year-old, coming on for Warren Joyce, who used to be the youth coach at Manchester United against Swansea. And they were interesting times, helped me develop as a person as well as a player, and eventually then I moved back up to Scotland with Ross County, where I had a successful goal scoring spell. Eventually led into a £200,000 move to Motherwell in the Premier League, where I stayed for 6 seasons and had really enjoyable times there. But the lure of Aberdeen coming in for me again, not making my first team debut there the last time. I went there for a year, and we finished third in the league under Jimmy Calderwood, just missing out on a European place, and really enjoyable times. Moved back to Livingston for a year, and then eventually going back up to Ross County, where I became a player coach, and eventually then I took over as manager.
Now it's interesting stuff. So you sort of, from the perspective of you've sort of played for different teams, and you had the opportunity to come across to England too, and obviously learn from different managers and different coaching staff and the like. And how much did you sort of take from learning as a player into management? What are some of the things that you sort of learn from playing for different teams, and obviously coming across to Burnley as well? What did you sort of take on board as a play into management, Derek?
Yeah, I think that being involved, senior professional players, you learn, the disciplines, the attitude, the will to win, the perfection, how it is to become a professional football player, the dedication, the time, the sacrifices, and how much you really have to dedicate your life to improving, much in the likeness to, a golfer, a snooker player. It's about repetition. It's about working on your left foot, your right foot, and working on speed and agility as well. And these are all the things that you can learn off of these senior players, that you then take that from your playing career into management.
No, absolutely. I think that, that's important to experience. I think as a player, to experience the game, working with different managers can be quite useful to get an insight in terms of how people go about doing what they do. Then you sort of obviously become your own self, and no doubt you did that, and you'd achieved success at Ross County. You went there, you achieved immediate success. What was your first stint like at Ross County? Obviously you knew the club well, and you had a feel for the club, but what was it like to actually manage the club? What was the experience like being a manager there?
Yeah, I took over when I was 32, and it was about 7 games into the season, and we had to get promoted in that season, and I didn't know if I should take the job or not because of the pressure that I was under to get promoted. If we didn't get promoted, then possibility of the team going part-time was hanging over us. So did I want to take that job on at that stage in my career? If I failed, then I might never get another opportunity to be a manager. One of the staff actually sat me down, an older member, and he said, listen, you might never get another opportunity to manage a football club or this football club. And then I believed in my own coaching methods. I went in, we got promoted, we got ourselves out of the division, and it went from there. I was 3 years at Ross County. We eventually got into the first division, and we got to a Scotland Cup final. We beat Hibernian, we beat Celtic in a semi-final 2-0, where they had the likes of Robbie Keane playing in the side, and for 3 years it was a fantastic insight to management. As been a young manager, 32 years old, up to 35, gone from being a player, had a short stint as a coach, and just seeing the differences between a player and a coach and a manager, and I think that's enabled me to go on from there.
Yeah, and so in terms of being a manager at Ross County, what was your sort of daily routine, in the sense that obviously different levels of the game and different teams, you've got different roles. Football management's never really straightforward, in the sense that we've interviewed different managers on this show in different leagues of the game, and you've got from managers that manage in the non-league, that having to do the daily activities outside the football as well, like things like making sure that the grass is cut for a game, and things like, for example, if there's flooding in the dressing room, all the way through to at the higher level where things are just pretty much done for. You can just focus on the team. What was your sort of daily life like at Ross County, Derek?
Yeah, we would have to help out, the kit. We'd maybe sometimes have to help out washing the kit. We would have to drive the minibuses. We would make sure that the change rooms were cleaned, the kit was cleaned as the cones, the markers, and really do everything that we would have one kit person, so we would help him with all the work, and we would have to do our own work at the same time, help with the lunches as well, just making sure that the players had the adequate food to go out and train with or come back in and be ready for the next session. So you've got to, at that level, have full involvement, and I think that keeps you grounded. When you go further in management, you know what you've had to do at the early stage. Every manager's had to do it, and I think that helps later on in your development.
Absolutely, I think that's a great point, an important point. I mean, we see sometimes managers in the Premier League who, off the back of playing careers, go straight to management, and being a good player or a great player doesn't always equal great manager. It's just, I think what'd be interesting is your perspective in terms of what it's like, and sometimes we sort of take it for granted, in the sense that we kind of think the transition is straightforward, but it's a whole different ball game altogether. And if nothing else, in my experience, Derek, I sort of think that sometimes managers who have been very successful, how we define success, and play at the very highest level, for example, in the Champions League and played in the Premier League for a number of years. Sometimes it can be a challenge, I think, in terms of getting the best out of players that aren't generally at the level that they've been at, and the transition isn't always easy. So was there a big difference? Was there a transition you had to make from being a footballer to being a manager?
I think that man management's very important, and I do think that when you get a star player and everyone thinks that star player will turn into a successful manager, I think that's always a difficulty for the player, because what happens is that the player, more times than not, hasn't had to think about what he's done in the football club. It's become natural to him, and what you find is that the players that are mediocre, so to speak, have actually had to think about the game more than the star player, where they've had to think about the position they've had to run into, what the outcome is, how you come to the outcome, where the star player just gets on the pitch and just plays, and finds that through pass, or finds the physical challenge easy for them, whereas other players, and then become very good coaches, have actually had to think about the game a lot more, and that's the reason why you don't get a lot of top players become top managers.
Yeah, that's a really interesting perspective, obviously, from someone who's been there like yourself and done that. And I think that that's really interesting. I'm sure the listeners will find that interesting, because obviously there's a lot of people, certainly I've spoken to, who have this sort of expectation, if a footballer has a great career, they should make the transition pretty easy. And it's not always easy, because certainly in my experience, looking from the outside in and being involved in football myself, it's almost like sometimes all the expectation that they have, not necessarily expectation to do well, the expectation they have in terms of the players to get the best out of them is not always easy. Like you said there, sometimes certain players, they're at a certain level, and I think that it's easy to underestimate that not every player has those attributes, and you've got to sort of sometimes dig deep. Especially obviously with budgets and that sort of stuff. And is that another thing that you when you went into football management in the beginning, you had to sort of deal with too, in terms of budgeting as well, to get players in? And how did you find that in terms of having a budget?
Yeah, I found that interesting as well, because you can only live within your means, and I think that with a football club, you can't, obviously, you don't want to overspend, and I know a lot of football clubs do that nowadays. They're spending money that they don't have, and chasing a dream. Whereas at Ross County, whatever came in and whatever went out equalled, and that was a challenge in myself, because you've got to take in players that you have to improve. You have to improve through coaching, and I've always enjoyed that. The player might have been released from a club higher up the league, say it was a Rangers or a Celtic or an Aberdeen, and they need to find a different avenue for them. They've obviously had ability somewhere, and it's about taking them down another level to give them that benefit of playing week in, week out, giving them confidence, giving them coaching points to make them better, and that's what we've had to do throughout my career as a coach and a manager.
Yeah, and absolutely. I think that's important, to get the best out of the players you've got and do the best you can with the budget you've got. I mean, that's a challenge. I mean, obviously, money, as we've seen in football over the last few years, more so than any other time in the game, it makes a big difference for teams. But also, we've seen teams that do have money too, not always spend it wisely. So that's a big thing as well too. I mean, it wasn't too long at Ross County where you experienced success, and obviously you sort of won promotion there. You did really, really well. What was the feeling like to achieve success almost immediately? You're a young manager. You achieved success pretty much from the off. Were you expecting to succeed so early in your career, or was that sort of...
I needed to achieve so early in my career, as I said before, so we needed to get promotion, and we were able to get that. And I think that when I look at as a football manager, I always like to try and achieve something each year. If it's getting to win a cup final, if it's getting to a cup final, if it's finishing in a higher position than the season you finished before, they're the challenges that I always used to put on myself. And I was 3 years in my first spell at Ross County. Then I decided to leave after my third season, we had just been to the Scottish Cup final, playing Dundee United. We actually, lost in that cup final, but we were a first division team and we had beaten Hibs and Celtic along the way. But I decided to go to Hibernian for 6 months to actually learn what it was like to work in a Premier League outfit. And I worked alongside Colin Calderwood, who's now the manager of Cambridge United. And what I did was that I went there, I learned what happened in the background. I'd been at Ross County, I'd been manager, became assistant manager, and just wanted to further enhance my development as a coach and a manager. And that's what I did for 6 months. And that 6 months were vital for my development in the manager I am now to what I was beforehand. And I felt that I wasn't an assistant manager, I was a manager. I spoke to Colin, I said, I've got an opportunity to go back to Ross County to be manager again. I feel it's the best for me. He was happy, and I ended up, going back there for 3 seasons. And we eventually, in the first season, we won promotion from the first division into the Premier League. We went 34 games unbeaten. And then we went 6 games in the Premier League unbeaten. So we went in a 40-game unbeaten run, and that was, special in itself. And just to win another championship, to get into the Premier League. The following season we finished 5th in the Premier League, just missing out on promotion. And then the next season we finished 7th. So we had 3 very good years again at Ross County, and I left going into my 4th season, and then found myself going to Plymouth Argyle.
Yeah, and it's really interesting because along the way you managed to win, I believe, an award, the PFA Manager of the Year in 2011-12. And what did that award mean to you? Derek, was it something that you sort of felt that highlighted your hard work and the achievements, or?
Yeah, I think it's very special because you get nominated by your fellow managers, and 42 clubs in Scotland, and to win that when you've got the likes of Rangers and Celtic, managers, Aberdeen, Dundee United, all in that vote, it was very special. And I think that we went on a fantastic run, and it's something that it is will live with me for the rest of my life.
Yeah, that's a fantastic achievement, and like you said, it's one of them things that no one can take it away from you. You achieved it, through hard work and through merit. And you mentioned there you sort of then go to Plymouth. Now, prior to you arriving at Plymouth, it'd been a long time for them since they'd sort of been to Wembley in a playoff. I think 20 years or so. What was it like to get there and sort of experience the drama, so to speak, of Wembley Stadium? Was it a huge experience?
Yeah, first season going to England, I had obviously travelled the length and breadth of Britain from one point to the other to get to Plymouth, and I think that it was a fantastic move for me because Plymouth Argyle at the time had not long come out of administration. They were in League 2. They had just missed out in getting to the playoff final the season before, and it was about trying to get there again. We beat Portsmouth in the semi-finals over the 2 games, fantastic encounters, and a very special day going to Wembley, 35,000 at Belfast going with us, but we just didn't perform on the day. We eventually were beaten by Wimbledon in the final, but I think that just the road that we took, and the fans were with us, they supported us in their numbers in that season. We were defeated in that year, but the following season we went up automatically, and missing out in the last game of the season to goal difference to Portsmouth.
Yeah, that's really interesting stuff because a lot of teams, a lot of managers, a lot of players, they miss out on going up in the playoff. It can go either way. We know that. They say
that at the time, if you had missed out on the playoff final, that in League 2, the average position you would finish in the next season was 10th in the league. So I knew that before the start of the season. I knew that it was going to be a challenge. I knew that there would be question marks. So we had to regroup, and we refreshed the squad. We took in new players. We allowed the ones to go that had probably been disappointed. We kept some because that was important know that what it took to get to the position we were in the season before, and better that.
So how psychologically did you? I mean, obviously, you freshen the squad up. It's going to have a big psychological impact, no doubt, on the team. But what about from a personal level? How psychologically do you pick yourself up and think, okay, it's a huge occasion. We're at Wembley now. I've got to refocus again and go again. I mean, is there anything that you sort of did psychologically, or is this something that you pretty much naturally a natural trait that you've got?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a cut-off point, and once something's happened, it's finished, you learn from it, and then you take that experience on to the next season, and the new season starts, and then you're working on a different season. The season before has gone. You don't forget what happened in that season, because you learn from the positives and the negatives from it, and the experiences that you have, and that enhances your ability to make better decisions the following season. And that's not only from the coaching staff or management staff, that's for the players as well. And I think that it's always important that you don't quickly move forward, because sometimes you can move too quickly and you don't know what the rights and the wrongs were from how you were able to get there. And I've always enjoyed working in a slower manner, a more methodical manner to get to where you want to get to.
Absolutely. That's I think that the mindset is a huge thing, and you can have all the ability in the world as a player, as a manager, but the mindset is key. How one reacts to certain situations. Obviously strange to expectation. You've been very early in your career at expectation at Ross County, so that obviously served you well going forward. You'd bounce back at Plymouth. You'd managed to sort of secure promotion. It's not an easy league. League Two, it's a tough league. There's a lot of teams that can beat everyone on a day. It's not an easy league. How did you compare the your experience in, say, Ross County to Plymouth in the sense of ability, and where would you say the likes of the Premier League in Scotland would stand? I mean, obviously, yourself, you've been there, done that. People talk about the difference between Scotland and England. What are your thoughts on that, Derek?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the top teams in League One would be able to play, in and around the bottom six in the Premier League. I think that is the standard where it is at this moment in time in Scotland. I think that the big difference between the leagues in Scotland is you play 38 games in Scotland, where you play 46 in England, and also you have a lot of cup games in England now. You've got what used to be the Checkered Trade Trophy, where you've got 3 extra games played, and you've got to play Saturday, Tuesday, quite a lot. In the top league in Scotland, you get international breaks. In League One and League Two, you don't get any breaks, and it's relentless. And you just have to see that the teams already at the start of the season have played in the League Cup, the other cup competitions, and it's been Saturday, Tuesdays for a lot of them. And that's a big difference that I did notice. The travelling as well. Plymouth was a good distance from anywhere. Last season in League One, our closest game was 2.5 hours away at Bristol, and you have to travel week in, week out on the bus. We never had train or plane or anything like that, and it was testimony to the players that mentally they were able to cope with that.
Yeah, that's interesting stuff, because I think that you've made some really good points, the interesting points. So I mean, for me, the season you get promoted, you've got to make big decisions after you'd sort of missed out on the playoff final. I mean, how tough is that? I mean, sometimes I'm a football fan myself, albeit I sort of work in the game too, not full time anymore. But the point of making these big decisions, you've got a team that sort of, you've gone to the playoff final, it's a lot of emotions involved, and you get to know people as well. And how tough is it to make these sort of big decisions in terms of, okay, I'm going to have to bring these certain players in, and to do that I might need to let certain players go, and so on and so forth?
Yeah, it's extremely difficult, and I think that you are always going to make good decisions. You're going to make decisions that you think a season later or maybe sooner than that or later than that you think, maybe I shouldn't have done that. And but at the time you made that decision on the evidence that's either been given to you or you've given to yourself. And I think that you can always look back at things and say, well, maybe I should have done that, or maybe I should have done this. But when you make that decision, you've got to stand by that decision, and that's the role of a leader and as a manager. You've got to be comfortable in it, and you've got to make it for the right reasons, and you've got to have the evidence for that. And that's what we did. We had players that we felt that had been through disappointment before I was there and while I was there, and it was probably about allowing them to leave and taking in players that hadn't had that disappointment and an experience from somewhere else that might have been better, that had been at a successful side, to try and add to our positive influence going forward to the next season.
Yeah, and that's interesting how you did that. I think that's sort of an art in itself, where you have to make these sort of big decisions, and it's not always easy. But as you know, that's part of being a manager, and a manager is certainly not for the faint-hearted, so to speak. Got to make huge decisions, and obviously there's pressure as well, the expectations. I think the other challenge too, sometimes that I think generally fans do know the game, but I think sometimes in terms of making the books balance, getting players in, it's not as easy. And we've seen a club that I worked at for a few years recently, Barry's trials and tribulations financially after field. Although we'd produced many players over the years, and without going in ins and outs there. But the point being is that it's not always easy to balance those books and meet the expectations. And is it tough as a manager? You've obviously got certain players you want to bring in, but you got to think, well, what's it going to cost, and can I bring this person in? And you look at loans and stuff like that.
It is extremely tough. I went to Plymouth, and we didn't have a big budget when we went there. We had a middle of the road budget, and your supporters are wanting you to get promoted, and you want to take in a different sort of player that you can afford, but you can only afford it, so you've got to deal with it. And I always spoke about overachieving at Plymouth, and the Plymouth Argyle fans didn't really like that, because they felt that their football club should have been in a higher division, or because they had big crowds, that entitled them to be in that higher division. But we had a budget that was less than a lot of other clubs who were able to get players that we couldn't get, so we were always fighting against other teams. And we see teams like Bury who have overspent over the years, tried to chase a dream, and been financed by owners that maybe didn't have the finance eventually, and that's when you get into difficulties. And Plymouth was a football club that had done that. They went into administration. I had to come in after them going through that administration, and Chairman James Brent would only spend what the football club could afford. And that's something that I had to deal with at Ross County as well. One of the reasons why I got the job at Plymouth was because I was able to work under the budgetary constraints.
Yeah, no, absolutely. That's obviously crucial, and certainly I think that in terms of the fans, that's obviously no doubt really interesting to them. And certainly in my experience, mentioning Barry, I sort of finished work there in 2006, 2007. At that point, we just knocked Sunderland out of the League Cup as it was then, and we sort of managed to sort of steer things in the right direction, balance the books. And I look back at the one of the team photos, and we sort of promoted a lot of young players as well, and there's 3 or 4 of them now playing in the Premier League. You kind of scratch your head and see how fast things can change at a club. But we had a policy, we tried to bring players through from the youth as well and blend them in, which wasn't always easy, because it's not an easy league to play. And what's your sort of thoughts on building a youth structure? Because I know you I think the youth side is important to yourself. And what's your sort of thoughts on building a youth infrastructure?
Yeah, when I was at Plymouth, I obviously got promoted into a position of head of football as well as first team manager, and it was about aligning the football club and the reserve team to try and get players through the system. So what we did there was we took in our reserve team. We had an under-18 team. We entered them into the Central League, which was a reserve team outfit, and then the Premier League Cup as well. So players between 18 and 21 had a competitive, and we were able to coach them as well to bridge that gap between the first team and under-18 football, which they hadn't had because of lack of funding. And so we financed that in a way where the money would come out partly of the youth system and partly of the first team budget. I would give some away to enable us to have a better structure, and that was going to enable the young players to come through the system. And it might not be in the first 2 years, it would be in 3, 4, 5 years' time, then to sell them on, to then generate extra money for the football club. And I think that's the way that I know a lot of football clubs have gone these days, is to try and sell players on for profit coming through the youth system, keep some of them playing week in, week out, or sell them on for millions of pounds. And I think that's just a way that League One and League Two clubs have to go about it.
Absolutely. I mean, one thing that struck me about Plymouth as well in the time that you were there is the style of football. To me, looking from the outside in, it looked like that, you know, there were changes in the way Plymouth would play the game, more offensive. I mean, I could be wrong. I'm only passively looking from the outside in, and I sort of make that sort of judgment on that. But to me, it looked like there was certainly a change in the way the team was playing, and it seemed to be more offensive and, you know, go at teams as well.
The previous manager played with 3-5-2, and the football club wanted to. Well, the supporters wanted winners back, so I knew about this when I was taking over. So I changed to play 4-2-3-1. We had two wide players in the wide areas to go at defenders. They wanted to see a different style of football. They wanted to see a more attacking approach to the game, which is fine. And we felt that was the best way to go about it. In the time there, we changed to 4-3-3 as well. We had, you know, one sitting midfield player with two attacking midfielders, and sometimes we would play with two number 10s where Alexa Ramirez and Carey would come in off the sides to support the striker. So, you know, we played very offensive at times, which did cause problems at times because of conceding goals, too many players going forward. Some teams want to play 3 at the back, which becomes 5 at the back, becomes very defensive. You have more players back, and it, you know, enables them. There's not a right way or a wrong way. Football evolves. Supporters want you to play in a certain manner. They enjoy it, then they want to go back to the other way of a different way of playing. But as a manager, I've always wanted to play attractive football, play with a bit of creativity in my team, because as a player, I always like to play in a role where it was off the front or as an attacking midfield player.
Yeah, no, that's really interesting. It's sort of the influence of you as a player puts its mark on the team, and I think that you know, that's a really interesting thing. And you do see that a lot, Derek. You do see the managers who take over a team, their persona, the way they played the game, the way they approach the game, their philosophy does influence the way it plays. In terms of the youth setup, did that filter down to the youth as well? Did you sort of like have a role in saying, okay, I want you to set teams up this way as well? Or
I didn't go and say that, listen, you have to play 4-2-3-1, you have to play 4-4-2 or 3-5-2. What I did say to the coaches was, you have to look at your players, you have to give them the benefit that I'm not going to be manager here at this football club forever. Another manager is going to come in and play a different way, and the players in the youth system have to understand different systems of play. And that's what we did at Plymouth. We allowed the coaches to coach the players in the best way that they saw fit at that moment in time. So there was never a stage where I said this was the only way you're playing, because I think that's detrimental to the players when managers change all the time. It's okay if a manager's going to be there for 10 years and the system of play is never going to change, but that rarely happens. But what I would do is that every month on a Thursday night, I would take the best 3 players. I would go to Ivybridge, it was an AstroTurf, and the best 3 players from under 10s, 12s, 13s, 14s, 15s, 16s, and I would coach them myself and see what their ability was like. The coaches were giving them, and that enabled the younger players to see that they were getting coached with a first team manager, and it gave the younger ones further down as well the benefit. If I do well, then I'm going to get an opportunity to train with the first team manager, and that was something we brought in as well.
Yeah, that's huge. I mean, can you imagine for a young player to have the first team manager take the time to come out on a Thursday and see what they're all about? That's something that'll live in their memory as well, and I think that's really important. Sometimes we do see in certain teams that the first team staff kind of distance themselves from the youth team, and I don't think it really bodes well when that happens, because you want the club to be all singing from the same hymn sheet as well. Everyone to know they've got a pathway.
I think it's very good for the coaching staff as well, because when the coaching staff
absolutely
see your first team manager come into training on a Thursday night, and they feed off that as well. I talk and coach in a different way from them, but the youngsters then need to know what it is to be a first team player, and they get wee bits of information that is different from what they would get from the coaching staff lower down, because at first team level you have to be on top of it all the time, and they get into that environment.
Yeah, no, it's interesting you say that, because you talk about first team level, and I think that's really interesting point. And for our listeners, the interesting thing is that sometimes in the lower league you see certain players getting loaned from the Premier League, and I think sometimes it's not always a good thing, because if you're playing reserve team football even in the Premier League, then it's tough to cut it in first team football. I mean, I don't know what obviously you've got a lot more experience than me in it, but my impression is that even reserve team football in the Premier League is nowhere near the intensity of first team football in the lower leagues. Is that something that sort of what are your thoughts on that, Derek?
Yeah, that is true, and I think that what we get nowadays is that reserve team football is players of a similar age, either 18, 19, 20 years old, playing in a reserve team. When I came through the system, my reserve team might be a 30-year-old coming back from injury, it might be a 28-year-old not getting a game, it might be an 18-year-old coming through the system, it might even be a 16-year-old and 22-year-olds playing. But what I was able to get was information from these senior players to become better, and what happens nowadays, they don't get that information. They're playing with players of a similar age, and they don't know the game. So when I was younger, I would be playing in a game, and a first team player would say to me, "Why are you running about chasing the centre halves?" I was playing striker at the time, and he said, "Just come off the game, allow them to have the ball, and when we say go, we go and go and press." And that was just a wee thing that sticks with me, throughout my managerial career as well as a playing career. And we don't get that nowadays, where a senior player, plays with a youngster to help them. And you see the difference when they come to you. You've got to coach them when they come in from the reserve team in the Premier League in a different way they've been coached in the Premier League, because they're playing with a different standard of player.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And I mean, it struck me one time, and so I'm not going to name names, but I was working in League Two, and there was a guy from the Premier League who'd sort of come along, and don't get me wrong, there's some players who sort of came down on loan who were fantastic, and they really dedicated themselves. The likes of say Casper Schmeichel, he sort of was really focused and up for it. But there were certain players at times, Derek, that you kind of thought, well, they didn't seem to have the stomach for it, in the sense that they'd been so used to being in that environment that, these fantastic training environments you've got in the Premier League. Don't get me wrong, some of these have got a good environment. At the time, we didn't have a great environment to train in, as truth be told. And you just saw them turn up in their brand new sports cars thinking, do I really need this type thing? And how important do you think hunger is to being, when you're looking to get promoted? You've got to be hungry and determined, and you've got to want it.
Yeah, I mean, it's a big thing, and it is moving out the game because of the amount of money that is in the game, and that's causing, trouble down the levels. Some players, before they even start, are making so much money that they don't actually need to play again at a younger age. But when I used to take loans, and I used to like a loan from January to the end of the season, and the reason for that was when they were coming to the end of the contract at a Premier League club, that they actually needed to perform to get that extra contract, or they needed to do well. Whereas at the start of the season to the December, they had still the comfort of having a contract at their club, and that hunger came from that, is that they needed the contract at the end of the day. And I always tried to sign players that required something. It was either money to pay their bills, it was either a new contract, or they had been released somewhere else and they wanted to show someone that they were a good player. And I always liked players that had hunger in them, and that was something that we always looked out for.
Yeah, that's interesting stuff. That you sort of the recruitment is based on players who are on the way up and the ascendancy, and sometimes you can look at a player's sort of pedigree and reputation, and I think sometimes what does happen, certainly in football at the highest level, sometimes players are picked on sort of past reputation in some respects. So you've got to look at things. But what about what changed? What's been, to me, what struck me that's changing in the game is we're relying more and more on stats for recruitment, and I think it's a useful thing. But I think also there's nothing like the eye in terms of getting a feel for it. And with yourself, Derek, were you influenced by statistics? Obviously, you've got statisticians, and how influenced were you by statistics in recruitment and deciding on keeping and bringing players in?
Yeah, it was an interesting point because the new chairman that actually took over at Plymouth actually, wanted to start taking in players on data. He wanted to look at the data and recruit players on that. And I did have to say to him that that's all well and good. I said that, but if you're going to do that, then you're going to have to spend money to get these players in, because if you're doing that, you're going to get the players at the top end of the scale that are creating goals, scoring goals, keeping clean sheets. I said, and some of the players that we've taken in that haven't done well at clubs in the past, but we've had a scouting system where we'd be going to watch games and knowing players you would have never had at this football club and done ever so well for this football club, and they've been sold on for money. So you've got to be careful on how you use that information. I think it is beneficial. We used to use stats and looking at games, the areas of the pitch where we used to attack, passes of players, or the creative passes, were the defensive passes. But we also have to remember at stages in the game, a ball into the corner and for 5 minutes to go and a player giving it away goes down as a negative if it's got out of play or if it's going to the opposition. And so we've got to be careful how we look at them all the time, but I do think they are beneficial.
Yeah, no, great point. I think, in my opinion, that they work well to complement what's being done. And I remember one time I was at a conference, and there was a team which I won't mention that had sort of really gone gung ho on statistics, and I think they'd watched the film Moneyball, and I think it was really, and I just thought to myself, wow, if the game goes this way, you're going to sort of isolate people who step up when it really matters too. When you're losing 2-0 at half time, or and you're looking for a character to come up and step up, and I think that you don't play on paper, but I think it's complementary and it can help in the season. But
you've got a team in England, and they'll use the statistics, but they'll take a player from League Two, and he's been very good at free kicks, and this is a sign that has been. He was excellent at free kicks. He would score free kicks, every other third week. Great at corner kicks, great at putting the ball in from a free kick as well. But they sign him for a championship club, and then they forget they're going from League Two to a championship club. You've got to be able to run, you've got to be able to move, you've got to be able to play 90 minutes on a Saturday for all this to come together. You don't just do as American football does, that you get subbed on and subbed off to take a kick. And,
absolutely.
It's something that surprises me that does happen.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think that I'm all for science. I've got an academic background as well, and I'm all for the science and psychology. But I'm also for using experience, and you can't put there's no substitute for experience. I think experience is a huge learning thing. I think for our listeners, I think what probably interests them is obviously Salford is a club not too far away from here, and we get behind the team. When last season was a successful season, it's been a successful few seasons. Now they find themselves in League Two. It's not easy. It's not an easy league. From your own experience what it's like to go up from League Two just from the fans' perspective, what are your thoughts on getting out of League Two? I mean, how tough is it? I mean, obviously you did it within your second season, but how tough is it, week in, week out, to keep that intensity when you've got teams that are really evenly matched and so on and so forth?
Yeah, I mean, it's extremely difficult. I mean, the year we went up, we had the likes of Luton in the league and Portsmouth in the leagues, really big clubs, Doncaster as well. And from looking now, you look at Salford and they've done exceptionally well to get to the position they're in, but they're not going to go up every season. They're going to get a season where they have to stabilise, be happy to be in League Two, and then the following season maybe look to try and push on. And I think that they have thought this through. I don't think that they need or they want to get promotion this season. They would be delighted if they got promotion. But League Two, there's a lot of clubs that are similar standard. I watched Salford this season already away to Carlisle, and I thought it was a fascinating game because it was two teams playing in different styles. And you look at the results week in, week out, it's very hard to predict who's going to win or draw in League Two because of the similar standard of player.
And that's the thing as well, Derek. I'm sure that the manager there is a great manager. Alexander's done a great job, and obviously the lads, the class of '92 lads. I'm sure they're under no illusions. But from the fans' point of view, sometimes fans can. I wouldn't say they're fickle. They go to the game, they pay their money, they're entitled to voice their opinion. But equally, I'm sure you've experienced it yourself where the fans. Sometimes it's sort of understanding that it's not easy. There are a lot of teams that also have the same ambition as well. And did you ever sort of feel that sort of pressure coming in? As a manager, you sort of notice what's been said, from the fan point of view. You just completely focus on your job in hand.
No, I think that you have to get the feel from the supporters, and I think that that can either help you or hinder you, and it depends on how you deal with it. And there is always going to be supporters that have an idea of what you're trying to do. There's supporters that think above their station, that they disrespect other teams in your division and think that you're the only club that deserves to get out of the division, and you should be better than anyone else because of financial clout or the amount of supporters that you've got going through your stadium. It doesn't work that way, and I think that if you take Salford last year, the top of the league in the National League for many weeks, they dropped down, they got into the playoffs, and find themselves in League Two. They've got no right to move through the divisions as quickly as sometimes they think they should, but they'll get to a stage where they will stabilise. They will be maybe in the playoffs this year, you don't know, and or they finish in mid-table. If they finish in mid-table, then they'll look and then trying to get into the playoffs the following season.
Absolutely, that's sort of common sense, and I think that really interesting. I think that the fans in general in the area, they're very knowledgeable about the game. I think they're really aware of how tough it is in League Two, and I think on the whole, everyone's sort of pulling together and enjoying the football, enjoying the experience. That's for sure. But we know. I mean, League Two is an interesting league where you win 3 or 4 in a row, you knock on the playoffs door, you're in the playoff zone, you lose 3 or 4, and you're knocking on the door of relegation. And that's the sort of fine line in the league where you're in mid-table in this league, and it can go either way in that sense. And when you got promoted yourself, did you sort of drop out of that promotion zone, or did you sort of hover there and thereabouts all the way through?
Yeah, we were up the top in the majority of the season, and I think that we just kept on going. We did drop out of the top 3 at some stage in the season, but we always felt that we could catch the teams above us. Doncaster above us by a good number of points, 8 or 9 points, with only about 5 games to go, and we still felt we could catch them, and we did. We went above them, and it was fascinating to be part of, and it's a great experience, just to, as Salford know, to get out of a division and get into a new division.
Yeah, no, definitely. And do you feel, from a managerial point of view, I mean, we've seen managerial changes in all leagues, and, notably last year in the Premier League, another team not too far away from here, Manchester United, you had the likes of Mourinho, who had been very successful for a number of years, but, United, for one reason or the other, didn't work out, but all that he'd done before sort of, I wouldn't say it counted for nothing, but it's kind of forgotten in one sense. I know you can't live in the past and so on and so forth, it's about the future, but do you think sometimes you can be a victim of your own success where, you see certain managers who, have done really well, all of a sudden the expectations there, it's like, okay, you've got to, hit the ground running straight away in one sense.
Of course. I think that we got into a situation where a wee bit of a fad at this moment in time of employing ex-players right out of playing and right into management. I think that some chairmen have gone for coaches and managers that have had relative success at a football club, might be a year, might be less than that, and moving them into another opportunity. I think that experience is important. I think that managers that have had a track record is good for football clubs because they must know what they're talking about. There's always a risk in employing a coach that has inexperience, but sometimes that can work well for you for a short period of time until things go wrong, and then you've got to look in a different direction. But I think that anyone would say that experience is important because if you're a lecturer or a school teacher, you teach and lecture to your pupils or students because you're an experienced person in your field, and you're helping them learn. And I think there's no different in football management or as a player. You're using your experiences that you had either as a player or as a coach or a manager to help or enhance the football club and a player.
Yeah, no, it's an interesting perspective. And in terms of yourself, Derek, you sort of moved on from Plymouth, and was in terms of, you obviously had many high points in your career, and you'd won accolades and you sort of done really well. In terms of the feeling, having been with the team and for all those years and achieved what you achieved, I mean, what's the sort of the feeling when you sort of move on from a club?
Yeah, I've been extremely disappointed because when you put so much effort into changing a football club, when you go in as a manager, because every manager has their style, every manager has to react in a different way, and I'd been there for 4 years. It was part of my life. A new chairman comes in, he wants to employ a new person because I was very close to my old chairman, and sometimes a new chairman doesn't like that as much, and that's what happened to me at Plymouth. We had a successful time, probably 3 years, 8 months. We were very successful. We had a sticky patch where it didn't go right for us in the end, and they chose to make a change towards the end of the season, and you have to get on with it. But it is difficult because you put structures in place, new managers come in, change that, and the football club is affected. And when you change a football club manager, you don't just affect the manager and his family, you affect the assistant manager, first team coach. It might be a whole host of players as well, so it can lead into 10, 20, 30 people, because you've got to remember children have to move school, the wife has to move out of the area, and all these things affect a change of a club manager.
Yeah, no, absolutely, yes. A lot of change and different staff come in and so on and so forth, and the infrastructure changes, and obviously the experience a lot of success at Plymouth, and I think any manager, irrespective of who you are, there's going to be times when things don't go according to plan, and I think sometimes it's about sort of, from my perspective, common sense prevailing and sort of hanging in there, because I think one of the worst things about football, I think sometimes is sort of the duration. Sometimes I think that things can happen, quick. Sometimes you get this sort of, I wouldn't necessarily get knee-jerk reactions, but sometimes you've got to let things unfold and go from there. But in terms of your own career, where do you see yourself now? Derek, you're sort of a young manager. You've got, your whole life ahead of you in management. Who knows how far you'll go as a manager. I'm sure you'll sort of achieve, incredible heights. But where do you sort of see yourself from here?
Yeah, I look to, managing in England or in Scotland at this moment in time. That's my two main objectives. I think I've enjoyed my time working in England. I enjoyed my time working in Scotland as well. So it's just really waiting for an opportunity to get back in. Sometimes you don't get to choose the football club that you want to go to. It chooses you, and you have to then go in and change the environment or the place to suit your management style and suit the football club to try and get success. And I've got to wait for the opportunity from a club chairman to get that opportunity.
No, absolutely, and I'm sure that opportunity will come sooner rather than later with the experience you've got. And it's been a really fascinating insight into your experience as a player, as a manager. I think particularly that you've sort of managed in the same level that Salford are aspiring to go next year, and they find themselves in this year. It's been really fascinating from my point of view. No doubt the listeners have sort of listened in, and I think that it's refreshing to get a genuine, honest appraisal of the way things are in the game. So I really want to thank you for coming on board the show, Derek, and no doubt we'll sort of look out to see how things materialise for you in the game. And it's been a privilege having you on the show. I'm sure the fans have really enjoyed it, and we wish you all the very success going forward in your managerial career and beyond.
It's been a pleasure, Jimmy, and I'd just like to wish the Salford City and the supporters a successful season, and hopefully they do get that promotion again. It is a tough league in League 2, but they're going the right way about it.
Thanks very much, Derek. Pleasure having you on the show. Great stuff.
Thank you.
And that was Derek Adams, who kindly joined on the show to give us a perspective of what it's like to manage in League 1 and League 2, but also talked about his playing career. And I found that really fascinating. No doubt you did, as a listener, find it really, really fascinating. And I think in terms of Salford being in League 2 as well, it's an interesting perspective that he had in terms of I guess managing expectations from someone who sort of managed to get out of that league as well. So it's been a great interview. Do email us on Facebook, the Friday Sports Show. Do drop us an email and send in your thoughts. And it's been a fantastic show. So I wish you all the best for the weekend, wherever you are, whatever you're doing. Get behind the local team and do get involved in sport in the local area. We'll be back again, same time, same place, Salford City Radio, 94.4 FM, with your host, Jimmy Petruzzi, on the Friday Sports Show. Have a fantastic weekend.